Okay, hello everyone. Today we're going to be focusing on some tips and advice for preparing for, what are often networking events, conferences, symposia, other events where you're going to be connecting with people, sometimes over research, sometimes in a more professional setting, but trying to make the most of these events to build community, to give you a sense of agency over the process, so that you can always walk away feeling like you've accomplished something that supports your own professional and career development. So I'm Dr. Joseph Barber. I'm the Director of Graduate Career Initiatives at Penn's Career Services at the University of Pennsylvania. I oversee the two graduate-focused teams that support graduate students and postdocs across disciplines. So hopefully the advice I'm going to give today is going to feel relevant to you as PhDs, as postdocs, as early stage researchers. Even if you're an undergraduate, there's going to be advice here that's going to be helpful for you. What we're going to cover today is a range of topics. We're going to sort of start off by getting a broader understanding of what networking is, why it's helpful, why you want to do it, or why you should do it, even if you don't want to do it. And then also think about what you can be doing ahead of an event, during an event, and then after an event to make the most of that experience. As I said, to support your own career and professional development. I'll also leave you with these slides so that any resources that I'm mentioning in these slides you can walk away with, and a few resources that are free for anyone to access that will hopefully support you as part of your own networking outreach. So let's start with a bit of a vibe check, because I think networking is one of these topics where people come at it with very different experiences, internal thoughts and feelings about what networking is. And as we'll see, sometimes that perspective is based on whether you see yourself as someone with more introverted tendencies or someone with more extroverted tendencies. So we'll expand on that a little bit. But this is a classic sort of stock photo of networking, especially, in the pre-pandemic days. This was the only version of networking that you might see if you were looking for stock images. But what we see here is a lot of people mingling fluidly. There's food, there's drinks. If you're looking from afar, if you were sitting on the balcony looking at this, you would get a sense that everyone there knows what they're doing. Everyone has something important to share. They all look very confident in terms of their networking. That's maybe not what they're feeling inside, but from the external perspective, suddenly you get the sense that these are people, doing important things. Now, if you are someone with extroverted tendencies, you might look at this and go, this is amazing. Like all these people I don't yet know, who I could get to know, all the conversations I could have, all the opportunities to engage in, investigation, explorations about people's backgrounds. You're very jazzed about this experience. You can't wait to get started. And then if you're someone with more introverted tendencies, you look at this and you already feel your social battery draining. You already say to yourself, well, this feels like it's a lot of hard work, right? I don't necessarily want to be in a room full of people. I don't know these people. I don't know what these people want. They all look like they're having good conversations. Will I be able to have some of those conversations? What am I doing here, right? And so very different experiences in terms of how people might see this. It's a different version of networking, right? It's still a very social setting, but obviously it's different now because rather than it being sort of a very fluid experience where people are, connecting and then disengaging and then finding someone else, these are people who are sitting down, right? It's more structured. This is going to be a longer conversation. It's easier to actually have food and drink if you had it because you're not now carrying it. You can put it aside. It's a seated experience. And so for the extroverted people with extroverted tendencies, this feels great. For people with introverted tendencies, this might feel a little bit more okay, right? It feels a little bit more positive because it's a bit more structured rather than just a massive moving people. It's a limited number of people where you have sort of more specific conversations in mind. This might be an example of a coffee chat when someone says, hey, we should get coffee at some point, right? So this is a professional engagement where you're meeting, catching up with a colleague, figuring out what's going on. Maybe you're reaching out to someone who's in a career that you're interested in, and you want to learn about that and have what we call informational interviews. Maybe you invite them to coffee, maybe you do a virtual coffee, right? But what differs obviously about this one, it's a one-on-one engagement. So all of that noise that's happening around you in a big networking event, now it's much more focused, much more able to have a sort of a specific conversation. You're able to focus your attention on that person. And oftentimes with coffee chats, it's a very intentional experience, right? You don't know who you're going to meet at a conference, in a sort of a social setting, on a networking event like that. But for a coffee chat, you've probably reached out, or they've reached out to you, and there's a a knowledge of what it is that you bring to the table, what questions that you have, how that person might be able to help you, what information they're looking for from you, right? So it's very intentional. You all know who you are. You've done your background research. You have questions in mind. And so it becomes much more structured in that way. Now, this was the pandemic. Obviously, this is, a lot of people were doing networking for a little while in this virtual setting. And certainly I know people, and if you are someone with extroverted tendencies, you might look at this and feel that sort of same negative feeling that someone with introverted tendencies feels when they look at a giant social event or an in-person one, that this, for someone with extroverted tendencies, can feel draining, right? The idea of having these conversations but being separated by being virtual, by not being able to engage can feel very stifling for some people. And on the other side, the people with introverted tendencies might really like this, right? So you're at home or in your own space, right? And you're basically a safe space and you're connecting with people virtually and it's very timed and it's very structured and you can see everyone's names in the box. So you don't have to remember what they're called because it's right there. You have access to all the things that you need. I might argue that there's one thing missing in this environment, and that obviously is a cat. Obviously, you need a cat, an emotional support cat at any point in time for anything. But this, from people with introverted tendencies was a very positive experience and much more manageable from a networking perspective. And sometimes what's great about this, as I said, it's a timed experience. You can be networking, and at the end of that experience, you end the Zoom meeting and you go from your your social sort of face where you're smiling to the I did it, right? And there's an immediate turn off from that perspective to be able to sort of move into your quieter space and recharge your batteries in that setting. So again, going back to the sort of the social setting, because the events that we're talking about are going to be more in person. They're not going to be the virtual ones of the past. They're going to be engaging with people at conferences and in symposia. So taking advantage of these experiences is going to be helpful. As I said, people with extroverted tendencies might have more energy going into this, although there's still advice I'm going to give you. People with introverted tendencies know that it's going to feel a little bit draining, but can still make the most of this experience. So let's think about these two terms as well. People with introverted tendencies and extroverted tendencies. Oftentimes it's just about where your sort of energy comes from, right? Does your energy come from the world outside, the people in that world? Are you someone with extroverted tendencies where you take in that energy and it sort of it boosts your battery, as it were? Or are you someone with more introverted tendencies where your energy is within, and every time that you're sort of in the world with people, your battery feels like it's draining all the time? I mean, these are sort of broad general terms, but you know which one of these that you sort of tend to to be, or how you see yourself, right? It's sort of, it's part of who we are and our characteristics. Now, extroverts don't make better networkers than introverts. Introverts are not worse networkers than extroverts. So it's not that simple in terms of this dichotomy. People with introverted tendencies can be really great networkers because in many cases what they do, and I am someone with introverted tendencies, is that I will try to find answers to any question that I have online first before I have to speak to a person. So I do a lot of the background research in the vague hope that perhaps I don't have to speak to a person. But then when I do speak to a person, I'm going to bring a lot more information to bear. I've done some of the background research. I have perhaps smarter questions to ask, all those types of things. People with introverted tendencies oftentimes do really well in one-on-one conversations with people, right? They've done their work, they're focused, they're engaged, they bring the energy that they have for that moment in time, and they make the most of those experiences. People with extroverted tendencies bring a lot of energy to a networking event, but sometimes that energy can get in the way of the goals of the networking event, right? You're enjoying the conversations that you're having so much that you forget sometimes that there's a strategic element to the conversations, that you're trying to find information that might be helpful to you, right? Enjoying and having good conversations is great, but that doesn't necessarily give you the information that you need, that sometimes networking is all about, right? You're looking for information that you can leverage to make you a better candidate for a role or to position yourself for your career next steps. Right, so sometimes they go hand in hand. A good conversation gives you that information, but not all the time, right? So you, as someone with extroverted tendencies, has to remember to keep focused on what the strategic goals are for those interactions as well. Now, for any event, a symposium, in-person one, there are obviously some tips, general tips that you can leverage to make sure that it is manageable, right? From having very clear goals and very questions in mind that we're going to talk about in just a second, to realizing that you can take breaks from engagement, that you can, do some interaction and then give yourself some quiet time to recharge. But also then making sure that you've done the prep work, making sure that you know what questions you want to ask, making sure that you know that you can introduce yourself so that you're never caught off guard when someone says, "Who are you?" Right? And you have a really great answer to go with that. These are all some of the things that we're going to touch on today that will hopefully make you feel empowered, whatever that event's going to be. So let's think about three goals of networking, or three sort of outcomes that we might think about connected to networking. One of them is a very career focused one, right? So you, for example, might be a postdoc now. You're going to be looking for a new position, right? A postdoc is a temporary position. It's a sort of transitionary role towards something else in academia or in industry or elsewhere. So obviously what you're looking for is to position yourself for whatever that next step is. Part of networking might be reaching out to people who are in that role, whatever that role is, to learn about how they got that role, to learn about the skills that they leverage in that role that you might need to highlight if you're applying for that role, to learn about the nature of the organization, the culture of the workplace that you might be going into, right? So there's a lot of information that you can draw from the lived experience of other people when you're thinking about it from a career perspective, right? You don't have the opportunity to have internships as a postdoc, right? So if you're trying to position yourself for a role that you've never had before in an organization that you've never worked at before, then connecting with people who have that experience is probably going to make you a better candidate as you think about updating your resume, as you think about your interviewing, and as you think about your sort of career decision making. So the number one here is a sort of a very career focused one. The second one here is building a community, right? Building a community of support. Right? There's a lot going on in the world, funding-wise, and everything else that's going on. Having people that can lift you up and energize you and keep you going through some of the challenging periods is always going to be important. It's going to be important to your personal wellness. So anytime that you're at a social event, a professional networking event, you are building community. You are connecting with people with shared experiences and shared goals. And you're finding people who might be able to support you, lend advice, lend support as you need it, and as you might be able to give it to them at the same time. A third goal or a third outcome might be making sure that you are lifting up those around you, right? You're supporting your peers, your colleagues, by being there, by shouting out the work that they're doing, by reinforcing all the great things that they've achieved and making sure that people know that those people around you have worked really hard, have made a great impact, right? So lifting other people up is great because it also empowers you, makes you feel good, provides some positive energy to the world, right? Each of these goals, each of these outcomes is something that you can think about, and they're all sort of overlapping in the way that you might apply them. But they are, how you might define what you're doing when you're networking, right? All three of these, or one in particular, these would be great sort of successes when it comes to networking. There are also lots of benefits to networking, beyond just sort of some of these broader goals, right? So as I said, number one here is going to be your career focused goals, where you're really thinking about what you need to position yourself for whatever role that you're applying to next. Maybe you're going into industry and you really want to know what skills are valued in industry so that when you write your resume, you're giving great examples of those skills in action. You're really making sure that those pop out to a recruiter who might be looking at. Maybe you're applying for a faculty role and you want to make sure that your research statement or your teaching statement really speaks to what a particular institution is after. And you might connect with people from your network, alumni from your previous institution who might be at those institutions, who might have insight to offer on that. The other benefit of networking is it's you practicing talking about yourself as well, right? So when you're connecting with someone, when you're communicating with someone, you're not just asking them questions, right? They want to know about you. They want to learn about you. And so you have to practice talking about yourself, or even advocating for yourself, right? Making sure that when you talk about yourself, you're highlighting the value that you bring, the experience that you have, the skills that you've gained. That practice is really important. It's important from a career perspective because that's what you're going to be doing in an interview, but it's also important professionally that you're always able to highlight the value that you bring to a particular role or project or experience, right? No one is going to advocate for you more than you. So you have to be your own best advocate, and practice saying these things, practice highlighting the value that you bring is always critically important. When thinking about networking and how it fits into your day-to-day, this was a great sort of bit of insight that I gained from this book. It was an author who was a science PhD who interviewed executives across a different range of industries and asking them how how they position themselves for those roles, how they made the leap from a PhD to the role that they had. And as part of these conversations, the author here was speaking to a woman executive in the oil and gas industry. And this is sort of a rule that she said she lived by. And I think it's a nice sort of way of thinking about how you might use your time professionally, especially when it comes to networking. So she said that 80% of her work week, not her family week or, family time or her sleeping time, but the time that she spends working, 80% of that she's doing the best job that she can do, right? So for you, when you're doing your research, you're really investing in making sure that that research is the best research that you can do. 10% of the time, though, she's devoting to professional development, right? Gaining new knowledge, new skills, things that are sort of additive to the work that she's doing. And part of that she included as meeting new people, right? So that's your networking, because new people have knowledge, new people have insights, new people have experiences that you can learn from, different perspectives. And so 10% of her working time she's spending gaining that new knowledge, but also gaining new connections. And then the last 10% is, she said that she spends telling people what a great work she does in that 80% of the time, right? So communicating her values. So remembering that doing all the great work is fantastic, but if no one knows about it, if no one hears about it, then maybe it's not having the impact that you hope. So making sure that you are always communicating the impact that you're making. So is a critical part of networking. So this 20% then is basically networking, learning about new experiences, new insights, new opportunities through people, but also then communicating to those people the great impact that you are making in the work that you're doing. So I really like that 80-10-10 rule as a sort of a foundation. Now, this is an example then of the type of event that we're going to be sort of focusing on as we think about networking. So the trainee research symposium, we're going to be connecting with people. There'll be posters, there'll be presentations, there'll be an opportunity to meet new people in different institutions, people you've never met before, opportunity to support some of your peers or colleagues who might be presenting at at this event. So again, this is just one example, but we'll use this as a foundation for what it is that you can be doing to prepare for any event similar to this. Now, at this event, there are going to be different types of communities or different types of people that you can meet, right? So if you are a postdoc, chances are you're going to meet another postdoc. And so you're connecting with potential collaborators. You're connecting with people who are in your community, living the same experiences that you're living. Some good, some less good, but people who have that shared experience. And you're going to have an opportunity to have conversations about their experiences, how they're managing that, what they're doing to make it through, how they're finding their positive energy in the work that they're doing, and so on and so on. You might also find, if you're a postdoc, that you are connecting with PhD students who are attending, right? And again, these are people who share a passion about the research that they're doing. But these are also people that, might appreciate sort of gentle mentorship, advice from your experience. They might appreciate some positive reinforcement about the work that they've done and keeping up the good work that they are doing with their research. Academia, unfortunately, is sort of not very good about positive reinforcement, about sort of rewarding people for all the things they do day to day, right? There's some big outcomes, publications and funding, but all the steps along the way aren't really necessarily celebrated as much as perhaps they could do. So anytime that you can tell someone that they're doing a great job with their research, that they've made great progress, right, it's going to be very uplifting for those people. You might find some undergrads at this event too. And again, same thing. You might provide advice and mentorship and support and positive reinforcement for those people. Then you might find early stage researchers and faculty at this event, right? So on the left-hand side here, again, these are great people to connect with, to integrate into your network. They have advice about career next steps that they've taken. They have advice about funding and research as a whole. Right? They're sort of a font of knowledge that you can leverage from their lived experiences. At the sort of the research symposium itself, they may not be the moment where you have a detailed or in-depth conversation with some of these people, but it might be an opportunity to say, hey, could I connect with you after this event? I really enjoyed your keynote. Is there an opportunity for us to have, a brief conversation afterwards, right? So you might use this as a foundation for a next step conversation with someone who perhaps has insight or knowledge or experience that you want to learn from a little bit more. Okay, so if that is the type of event that we're talking about, then what can we do ahead of the event to make sure that that you're ready, right? So first things first is sort of clarifying, well, what actually are you doing at the event, right? So whatever the event is, there's a whole range of reasons that you might be there. You might be presenting. You might be there to support other people. You might be there to attend some of the workshops or trainings that they have at whatever the event is. You might be there because you just love to connect with new people and you want to see this as an opportunity to get out of the lab and connect with people and have conversations and learn from them. You might be looking for new knowledge. You might be looking for a role, a next step, a job that that you want to move into. And perhaps there are people there who have some of those opportunities and can give you insight into those opportunities. You might have specific questions about a field or an industry or a research area that you want answers to. And you might be there because someone told you that you should be there. And you're like, I probably should, even if you don't want to be there. But that also, is an outcome as well. Right? So all of these are valid. All of these are true. There can be more than one that sort of is influencing what you're doing. Try to figure out what your priorities might be helpful, simply because then you know if you're successful, or rather you know when you've been successful at a particular event that you're going to. Right, so questions. Questions are always going to be important as a way to make the most of these events. And it's going to be very important to figure out what questions do you want to ask, what questions do you need to ask, and then to figure out who might have answers to those questions. Of all the people at the event that you're going to, does someone in particular have an answer to one of the questions that you have? Now, if we go back to our idea of introverts and extroverts, or people with introverted tendencies and people with extroverted tendencies, if you walk into a social event as someone with introverted tendencies and you don't really know what you're doing there and you don't really have a clear goal and you don't know what questions you're meant to be asking, you're going to find that your battery drains very quickly, right? It becomes very overwhelming. But as soon as you have questions, you can say to yourself, great, I have this question, I haven't been able to find the answer, and these people probably have an answer to that question. This person here and this person here. And so I can reach out, I can connect with them during the event and ask them the question. We're going to talk about other things as well, but that's sort of your ultimate goal. And then if you do that, you've achieved your goal, right? You have a very targeted sort of set of outreach options that you're going to take a look at as part of your networking. And then when you've done those, you can feel success. Extroverts, again, people with extroverted tendencies, making sure that you thinking about those questions, keeping them front of mind, so that as you are engaging, connecting, and building, professional relationships, you're also getting to some of the answers that you're looking for as part of your networking. So here are some, broad goals. I'm not saying that you need any of these goals or all of these goals, but just as examples of what goals might be, so that when you go to an event, you are sort of making progress, right? You're not just being sort of buffeted around on the winds of a conference, but you're saying, here's what I'm going to do at this event. Here's why I'm going. This is what I want to achieve. This is what success looks like for me. So that might be sometimes just a stretch goal. I'm going to meet 5 new people, right? It might be meeting with people from different institutions because you might be interested in what research looks like at those institutions. It might be strengthening a relationship that you have with someone already, right? You've met them at a previous event, but you only met them once and you see them again. You're like, great, can I build on that event to sort of, integrate this person more fully into my network? It might be learning about other events that people are doing, right? If they're going to this event, maybe they are someone who's on the research scene and they know what events are going on. And maybe there are other networking events or industry meetups or whatever it might be, right? So tapping into the knowledge of people who are at these events is a great goal to have. Practicing your own pitch, introducing yourself, iterating that process of saying, here's who I am, that takes practice to feel confident and feel like it's, a good representation of you. So trying that out in a few different ways is a great goal to have. Making sure that you, add a few people to your LinkedIn network after an event, right? So meeting someone at an event is a great first step, and then following up to do a LinkedIn connection is a great second step to sort of integrate them more fully into the network. And then there may be some career goals as well. Obviously, I'm from, the career services office, so career goals are always in my mind as I think about networking, but finding out about, what people are doing, how they position themselves for next steps, where they're looking, what opportunities that they're seeing could also be great goals as well. Now, you don't really need scripted questions, but I want to give a sort of an example of the types of questions that you are, potentially able to ask as part of a conversation, right? And again, these are all integrated into a normal conversation that you're having with people. You don't go through with a checklist and get these questions answered, but these are just examples of the types of questions that you might have. And as I said, I'll share the slides with you so that you can take a look at these if you're interested in these, but we don't necessarily have to go through these one by one. So taking all these big goals, these big questions, trying to boil it down then to something that you know is going to be manageable for you, right? Because every event is a limited time and you have limited energy. So saying to yourself, well, for this event, these are what I'm going to do, right? So we had multiple goals, multiple questions. These might be some of the specific ones that you have. And then even from this list of, what do we have, six here, you might boil it down to your top three so that when you're going out, you're stepping into the event, you might have an index card or something on your phone as a note to say, this is what it's going to look like for me to be successful at this event, right? All strategies that you can use that, keep it manageable and meaningful for you. Other prep work that you can do is to prep your pitch, right? And by pitch is basically just an introduction, right? You're not actually doing an elevator pitch. You're not trying to sell services or anything like that. You're just trying to introduce yourself to people in a sort of a structured, meaningful way. And there's no one way to do this, right? What I'm giving you here is just an example, right? It's very hard to sort of create this very artificial structure because it's a conversation. So it might interrupt you. It might not have time to do a full 30 seconds, but you want to be ready, right? You want to have your introductions ready to go so that you do feel confident. The more confident you feel, the more confident that you'll be in these conversations and the more you'll get out of it at the same time. So some key things from this one, making sure that people can always pronounce your name. So, you know your name. When you're introducing yourself, make sure that you say it clearly enough that someone can say it back to you, right? Making sure that people can remember your name so that they can introduce you to someone else is always a great sort of empowering tool because sometimes when people introduce themselves, their name comes into my head and it evaporates immediately, right? And if they're not wearing a nice name badge with their name on, oftentimes it's hard for me to keep that in mind. So you can sort of reinforce that in other people, right? At the end of a conversation, you can tell them your name again because I guarantee most people aren't going to remember it. And that's a really sort of empowering way to make sure that people feel confident so that they can talk about you and introduce you to other people and say, hey, I had this great conversation with so and so. At conferences that I've been to, when I've organized a conference, I've always made sure that the name tags are double-sided so that if they twist around, the ones that you put over the string over your head, that your name is on the back and the front. Because every time I've gone to a conference and I'm trying to remember someone's name and they're wearing a name tag, it's always twisted backwards and I can never see the name. So I always appreciate making sure that other people have access to names. That's something that you can do as part of your introduction. Talking about your role at your institution, talking about your research area, because oftentimes you're going to be at a research-centric symposium or event, so people are, very much interested in that. And then once you've introduced yourself, obviously you're keeping the conversation going. So ending with a question that might be, and how about you? Or what did you think of the keynote? Or whatever it might be, right? So making sure your introduction leads into a conversation is going to be an important part of that. For a more career-focused conversation, obviously, you're going to touch on the same things, your role. You might highlight some of the skills or knowledge area that you have. I'm good at doing this. I developed this novel tool to do X, right? So things that sort of really speak to your value a little bit more specifically. When you're chatting with people with a career conversation in mind, giving them a sense of where you're going, right? I'm going to be applying to industry, or right now I'm on the academic job market. If you provide that type of information, the person can potentially then be of help to you, right? If they know what it is that it might be helpful to you, they can offer suggestions or advice or whatever it might be. If they don't know that, then, they don't know what they can do to help. So, picking people that you are trying to connect with strategically, you want to talk with people if you're going to apply for industry roles who have industry experience. You want to talk to people in academic roles if you're applying for academic jobs. But you may not know who you're talking to. But just being ready to make sure that you're articulating some of your future goals is a helpful part of that conversation. Now, AI tools are great for some things. They don't know you at all, right? Your AI tool, whatever you might use, has no real knowledge of your background and your expertise and your experience. So they're not necessarily going to be great at sort of coming up with your elevator pitch for you, right? They're just going to come up with something that doesn't sound like you. So in this case, you can, if you want to, brainstorm with AI tools to think about different ways to introduce yourself or think about different topics that you want to focus on. So I gave two different types of prompt examples here, right? Prompts that you might type in that don't necessarily, give the AI all it needs to come up with a perfect pitch for you, or an introduction, but allows you to sort of brainstorm a little bit about what those introductions might include, right? So you can do this with your friends, you can do this with your colleagues, you can do this with non-AI tools. But if you are interested in using AI tools, or you find them beneficial, these are a couple of prompts that, as examples, that you might use as part of that introduction process. Again, I'll share the slides with you so you can take a closer look at these. Before any event you go to, you also want to make sure you've updated your LinkedIn profile, because it may be something that someone takes a look at either during an event or after an event, right? So making sure that it's up to that it's in a good position is going to be very helpful for you. I'm just going to run through 5 or so areas that you just want to update if you haven't updated them recently. Mostly in the sort of the top half of your LinkedIn profile, because that's where people are going to spend most of the time looking at you if they pull up that profile after they've met you. So just making sure that this looks good. First things first, making sure your photo is up to date, looks good, making sure that you're taking advantage of any resources that you have on your campus to get a professional photo done. If you're at Penn, for example, we have a photo booth as part of the Career Services Office, but you'll often find that departments or particular schools might have professional photo opportunities as well. Or you just find a friend with a smartphone, and you can pretty much do this anytime that you like. Let me just run through some things to avoid, right? This first line here is very much they're pretty decent photos, but there's no eye contact, right? And we're talking about networking as a very social experience. So you always want to feel like you're connecting with the person when they're looking at your profile. And all these people are sort of, they're looking different ways, and it sort of begins to make you feel somewhat anxious. What are they looking at? The second line, second row, so better eye contact. The problem here is the lighting, right? Lighting is like your handshake when you're meeting with someone. You want really good lighting in your photos because it's the first impression that you're going to make. So either too bright or too dark. These are things to sort of focus on with your photo. The third row problem here is too many people, too many body parts, right? The creepy hand on the shoulder picture. If you're having to crop out someone from your photo, it's not the right photo to use for your LinkedIn profile. And then obviously the fourth row, the challenge here is not enough body parts in terms of the photo is cropped in such a way that you're missing parts of the face or the head or whatever it might be, right? So these are things to avoid. This is the type of photo that I think works well on LinkedIn. These are great eye contact, good positive emotional states being expressed here, smiles. The background is nice and interesting, but doesn't get in the way. So sometimes you can have a plain background, like in the top row. Sometimes you can have a green one. Feels nice. Have to wait for spring for that to happen. But these are all good examples of photos. And as I said, the social element is important because smiling faces and things like that adds a sort of a sense of positivity to your audience, right? Parts of our brain light up when we see positive emotional states. And so, it helps that person connect with us, even virtually, when there's a positive, affective state, subjective state being presented in your facial expression. What about AI tools when it comes to photos? Well, I don't know Leah here, but Leah made this post on LinkedIn, which I thought was very interesting in terms of not trying to, filterify or use AI generated photos as much as possible, because it sort of breaks that sort of sense of trust that you have with someone, that you are presenting yourself as someone that you're not really, right? An AI photo is taking you, but it's making you something not quite you. And Leah says here that, if you're doing that with a photo, maybe you're doing that with your experience, with your knowledge, with your skills, right? So you don't have to listen to Leah. As I said, I don't know Leah, but I think the advice here is probably good advice in terms of being, having a professional photo that is true to you is much better than sort of leaning into these AI tools. Now, this is me being AI-ified, and the photo on the left is me, and the photos on the right are definitely not me, and they kind of creep me out. And I don't like them at all. There's something not quite right there. So, I agree. I think with all our flaws and everything, a real world photo is perfectly fine. I would avoid the sort of the weird, uncanny valley photos on the right-hand side. Other things you can do on your LinkedIn profile, you can change your banner picture to sort of reflect something about you. Sometimes along with your photo, this says something nice about you. It adds to your narrative. So we have a landscape designer with green imagery. We have a someone working in financial success with a road to the future. From a science perspective, PhD with the University Science Center, the Perman School of Medicine in the background. Avery here doing research at Penn, but also supporting, um, you know, uh, cancer-related fundraising in his own time. Passionate about the research, passionate about solving these problems. Sometimes the background is just supportive of the type of research that you're doing, whether that's genetics or robotics, right? You can use that background as a way just to sort of get people sort of a better understanding of where your focus lies. Really not that important, but something to think about if you really want to sort of make your profile welcoming and engaging as people are connecting with you. URLs, very simple thing to update. So this is my LinkedIn URL here. I can give this URL to people. It takes them to my profile. If you haven't updated your URL, then probably it's going to look a little bit like this, right? It's going to be a whole bunch of random numbers and letters after your name, right? This is just the default profile on LinkedIn. And this doesn't look quite as professional as it could do. So you can just go to your LinkedIn profile, click edit my profile, and then edit your custom URL. And then you can see here, you can edit it. You can edit it as many times as you like, so long as no one has taken the name that you're choosing. But it's a really easy fix just to sort of add that level of professionalism to your profile. And then in your resume and your CV, you can certainly include your LinkedIn profile. And you can see here, these are just 4 examples, one which has all the random numbers and letters, and then one at the bottom which has, the nicest one. It's sort of tight. It has the URL, doesn't have any of the HTTPS side of things. So that would be the one I'd recommend if you're using this in a resume or in a CV. But looks much tidier than the one with random numbers and letters. Okay, and the next part of your profile that you can actually update is adding your name pronunciation to your LinkedIn profile, right? This is another way to make sure that people know your name, can say your name, can introduce you with that name. It's really, I think, a key part of successful networking. Part of getting the name right or helping people get your name right is you want people to be able to advocate for you, to sort of shout out your work, to talk up the things that you've done well. And that's always going to be much more feasible for someone to do that if they are able to confidently say your name, right? In the way that you want them to say it, not in the incorrect way or the wrong way. And so this is, just a hypothetical example is if I don't feel comfortable saying your name because I think I might get it wrong, then maybe I'll just use that name less because I don't want to make that mistake. And obviously you want me, if I'm advocating for you or advocating for your work, you want me to use your name. In an interview scenario, it's also going to be very important because it can really set the stage for a very positive engagement. You come into an interview, it's an on-site interview, the hiring manager comes out of their office to welcome you to to the room to start the interview. And because they may not know how to say your name, they sort of are hesitant slightly. And they might say, could you say your name? I want to make sure I don't get it wrong. Or perhaps they don't do that and they just get it wrong from the get-go. But this idea of, I don't want to make a mistake or I don't want to get it wrong starts off the interaction in a much more negative way than it could do if they had your name and were able to say your name out loud and confidently. All right, so making sure that your hiring manager in this case, feels empowered to welcome you with your name pronounced correctly, I think is very important. Now, an easy way to do this, obviously in an email to them as you're scheduling an event, you can tell them how to pronounce your name. You can also make sure that they can see that on your LinkedIn profile. So if you go to the LinkedIn app, you have to do this on the app on your phone as opposed to on your desktop. But if you go to the LinkedIn app and you edit your profile, you can see that you can include a recording of your name that you give in your own voice, right? So making sure that it's right. You're going to say it loudly and slowly so people can hear it. And once you've recorded it on the app, whenever I go to your profile, there's going to be this speaker icon there, and I can click on that, and it's going to allow me to hear you say your name. And so if I were inviting you for an interview, I could listen to that name over and over again until I felt like I could say it confidently. And that way, when I do welcome you to the space, I can say it in the way that you want it to be said. You feel more positive. I feel more confident. The whole interview in that scenario starts off much more positively. So even if you think your name is easy to pronounce, make sure you've added the name pronunciation to your LinkedIn profile. So we have the banner, we have the photo, we have the name pronunciation. The headline is also another one to focus on. So the headline is pretty much the first thing people know about you. That's what comes after my name here, engaging communicator and creative leader. So that's the thing that you are giving people to give them a sense of who you are. Now, chances are, if you haven't updated your LinkedIn profile, it might say something like this, right? I just took a sort of snapshot of people with a postdoc as their main headline. And obviously, none of this information provides, clarity about the nature of the work that these people are doing, the impact that they're making, the things that they are passionate about, the skills that they have, right? So I don't even know if they're a postdoc in the STEM fields. I don't know what anything about them just from the word postdoc. So it's a missed opportunity, I think, to give people something that gives them a sense of who you are, even before they've met you, even before you've introduced themselves to you. Now, how do you set up a good headline? Well, there are certainly formulas that you can take a look at, right? So these are just examples of a couple of formulas. Very sort of, as the name says, very formulaic in the way it is, but they get at different types of information that allow someone to just know you a little bit better, right? So just a couple of examples of the types of formulas that you can use. And again, if you want to think about using AI, this is a great opportunity to sort of brainstorm different versions of yourself. And one of the things I like about AI tools is that rather than just saying, create me a headline on LinkedIn, you can say, create me 25 headlines. And then you can pick and choose through those for the bits that you like and the words that you like. And then you sort of iterate that process and you make your own version based on some of the brainstorming suggestions that the AI tool is giving you. So once again, this is just a prompt that you can use to try to sort of think about how you want to portray yourself and how you want to sort of create your own professional brand. AI doesn't know you, but it's a great tool to help you brainstorm some of these things. Now, if you want to look at sort of more ways to position your headline and your about section, there's a great video that we have on our YouTube channel, Penn Career Services YouTube channel. Here's a link to that. Again, you can take a look at this in your own time. The link will be in the slides, which I'll share at the end of this presentation. The last thing to focus on then for your profile is going to be your about section. So this is an opportunity for you to sort of give a little bit more information, to expand on the things that you are interested in, that you're doing, to make yourself make more sense to people who don't know your background. So this is definitely a sort of a part of the LinkedIn profile that's going to change over time and adapt as you add new information. Again, because it's a very sort of unstructured part of it, there's not specific advice that I can give you that sort of make it easier, but let me give you some general advice that will hopefully be helpful. The first one is always to have it be first person when you're talking about yourself. So, you want to make lots of I statements. I'm interested in this. I do that. You don't want to have third person. Joseph Barber is someone who does this, because that just feels weird. It feels like you have a narrator who's talking about you, but you're the narrator, so that it gets confusing. So first person is always is helpful. Try to make it sound like you, right? Don't write overly formal summaries. It should sound like you're introducing yourself to an audience, to people in an event, as part of a conversation, right? It should be conversational, not like you're writing a formal cover letter for a very specific position. Even cover letters can feel a little bit more conversational sometimes. So conversational, so that when I read it, and then if I then meet you, it sounds like the same person. Other things to focus on, making sure you highlight a few skills, a few accomplishments, and then think about who your intended audience is, right? You're speaking to everyone who's not looking at your profile, but maybe there's one audience in particular that you would want to gain the most from that experience, right? So maybe an industry hiring manager or a recruiter or something like that. So you can just make sure that there's enough for that person and also make it applicable to anyone who might be viewing your profile. Here's a structure that you can use as you're thinking about the about section. Again, this is just one example of the many approaches that you might use out there. I'll leave this on the slides. You can take a look at it in your own time. But this is a great way of just sort of trying to break yourself down and make it a little bit more of a structured process so it's easier to write. And of course, because we're focusing on sort of AI prompts as a way to help, these are 3 different AI prompts that can then help you iterate and brainstorm what that summary section or that about section might look like for you. You don't have to use AI, but if you do like to use it, these are some examples of how you can use it without losing your voice, without losing your identity as part of the process. Because again, AI doesn't know you and it doesn't sound like you, so you really want to make sure it does sound like you. Okay, we've made the preparation work happen, right? So you've done the prep work, and now you're getting to the event itself. At the event, some things worth focusing on. We talked about in the virtual setting how your image, your picture, is going to be sort of one of the first impressions that you might be making. At an event, one of the first impressions that you might be making in person is going to be your handshake. Now, not everyone wants to shake hands, not everyone can shake hands, but it is a common thing that happens in a networking session. So being ready to make sure that you are doing it well and doing it confidently is important because handshakes don't always go right, right? Even if you have the best intentions to be confident and suave as you're doing this, the social environment is a fluid one, and sometimes you have to adapt to that. Sometimes, it's just lots of things happening and your attention isn't on the right space and you're trying to figure out the best way to shake someone's hand and it all goes somewhat pear-shaped. And then this is sort of like my worst nightmare, primarily because it's caught on camera forever and ever and ever. But I think, probably we've all been in a situation where you've tried to shake someone's hand and either you missed or you grabbed the fingers instead of the hand and it just didn't feel very confident. And it didn't make you feel good inside. So just making sure that we're then being very intentional about it, I think is helpful. It's not that you need instructions for a handshake, but probably no one's ever taught you how to do a handshake. So we're all just making it up as we go along. But these are some of the steps that you can think about to make sure that your handshake feels confident and gives you that first good impression. If you can, standing up to shake someone's hand, so you're at the same level is a very good way of doing that. Keeping eye contact, you're not looking at your hand, you're looking at them because you're probably going to be speaking at the same time, introducing yourself, saying your name, listening to their name, making sure that you're, especially for interviews, your hands are dry. Everyone's nervous, everyone feels kind of sweaty sometimes before an interview, if you're shaking hands in an interview. So, making sure your hands feel dry. And then keeping your hands sort of in upright positions, so not coming up from the side, not being sort of weird like this, keeping your thumb up in the air to a certain extent. And really the secret to a handshake that I think makes it successful every time is to think about when you are actually grabbing the hand and shaking it, right? So as you are shaking, you want this part of your hand, the sort of the webbing between your thumb and your finger, to hit that side of the other person's hand. So you really want those hands to interlock before you shake, right? So don't in your mind think I've got to shake, I've got to grab the hand and shake it. Think I've got to connect the hands. So really it's a forward motion, right? You want to connect the hands like this, grab firmly, shake, right? Because if you grab too soon, you're going to get the fingers and you're going to end up with one of these shakes, and that's not going to feel confident for either one. So make sure you connect at the webbing first, then grab and then shake. That to me is the secret of the handshake that I always try to keep in mind so that I don't grab fingers and I don't feel bad about it. Shake a couple of times and then move on with the conversation, right? So simple as that, but worth practicing with a friend, colleague, get feedback from them. How does this handshake feel? So that again, it's, becomes automatic. You don't have to think about it as part of the experience. Dry your hands. And we talked about, sweaty hands in an interview. Everyone sort of has that. Everyone feels nervous. But dry your hands is another bit of advice that I have, especially in a conference or a symposium setting, because the most likely place that you're going to meet someone that you actually want to connect with at a conference and event is not probably at the networking session. It's coming in and out of the bathrooms because everyone's going to be using that area sort of fairly frequently. So you're busy. The bathroom is busy. You wash your hands. The dryer doesn't really work. You come out with somewhat moist hands. They're clean. They're washed. But then someone meets you outside, it's like, hey, and then they shake your hands and your hands feel somewhat moist and you've come out of the bathroom and it's all bad stuff, right? So whatever the event is, just make sure your hands are totally dry after washing them and you won't run into any of those troubles. Piece of advice for you. Starting a conversation, right, and any social event, you're going to have an opportunity to begin a conversation. Sometimes that feels hard, sometimes it feels easy, sometimes someone else starts. Again, there's no need to sort of memorize these or have a list of things, but just keep in mind different ways that you can start a conversation with someone so that it's easy, right? You're just making it easy. You're lowering the activation barrier to having a good conversation. One of the ones I often use is this last one. Hey, I don't think I've met you before. I'm Joseph. And then sometimes they're like, no, we've met. I'm like, oh, we did. But anyway, it just sort of gets over that sort of introduction because I may not remember if I've met them. So I'm just going to assume that I haven't. But then we can sort of catch up after that one. So again, just different examples of ways that you can start a conversation so that you can get into the introductions and then get into more meaningful conversations. When you're in one of those fluid environments, like that photo I showed right at the beginning, where people had food and drink and they're moving around and it feels sort of somewhat overwhelming, think about how you're positioning yourself in this space, right? Because sometimes they're what we call closed and open sort of groups at networking events. Obviously, the one on the left here is a closed group. No one can join this group because everyone is sort of facing inwards and there's no space. The one in the middle is also sort of a closed group because these people look like they're having a, very specific conversation. It will be hard for someone to feel like they could join that because it feels like it's interrupting. The one on the right here is an open group because there's an opportunity to join either of the sides of that sort of C or N or U shape. I had AI try to give me actual pictures of people, so I wouldn't have to use the sort of the icons here. But for whatever the reason, it wouldn't it wouldn't allow me to have a picture that wasn't this person looking it up at me. I kept saying, no, I don't. I want to see the top of their head. I don't want to see their eyeballs. And no matter what the prompt was, I kept getting people looking up. So this is just my image for you, just to make it feel real, even though this is not exactly how networking looks like. So again, this is your open group, right? When you're joining an open group, sometimes they're already in discussion, so you don't necessarily have to barge into that discussion. You can just join, wait for a pause, introduce yourself, ask them to carry on, or just wait for an opportunity to add value to the conversation. But you always want to make sure that you've introduced yourself, right? Everyone wants to know who you are because you've just suddenly appeared in the group, and that's how you get to know people. So, but you don't have to sort of take over the group. You can be very quick and very subtle, saying, "Hey, I'm Joseph. It sounds like a great conversation. Please carry on," right? And then you're part of that group. Again, this is the closed group. Don't do this when you're creating the groups because it limits the opportunity for people to join. If you're going to join the group and it's a sort of creating a group like this, always leave an opening. Always leave an opening so that you can invite other people to the group, so that other people can contribute to that community that you're building. Now, some people will feel much more confident in these social settings than other people, and there are ways that you can support your peers and colleagues around you. One of those is to see people who may not be as part of a group and to invite them into your group, to see people who have not contributed to the conversation, and without putting them on the spot, say, "Hey, is there anything that you would like to add to that? Do you have a specific question?" So again, not forcing it upon people, but providing people time and space to add value, because sometimes it's hard to join a conversation. People are jumping in, they're speaking quickly, you may have some thoughts, but if there's not space that you can hold to allow you to sort of get your thoughts together and say the words, then sometimes that's hard. So giving space to people, and by space I mean time, to contribute their thoughts is going to be helpful. Sometimes at a social event, you're going to see someone who is separate from it. They may be recharging. They may have done their conversation and just need a moment of time. I think just acknowledging the fact that everyone likes a break sometimes, but sometimes they may be looking for a group to join, right? So you can just ask someone, "Hey, you may be looking for, you may be taking a break. That's great. We're talking about this. Would you like to join our group?" Right? And that's a sort of an opportunity then to help them to be part of that conversation. Some general tips for what might be productive conversations, right? Just things that are perhaps not obvious, but things that you should sort of focus on. The idea that the more that you are curious about other people, the better the conversations will be. The more that you can follow up on things that people have said, so that you're being an active listener, the more that you will actually pay attention to the conversation, and that's going to be helping the conversation feel like it's productive. Making sure that, again, you're creating space for different people to add their perspectives, because when you're getting to know people or building your community, having different perspectives be part of that conversation is helpful. And then just being your authentic self, right? Making sure that you have a strategic introduction, that you have some key questions that you're looking for, but realizing that, you bring your own value to any sort of community that you're part of. Leaving a conversation, sometimes people in these social settings feel like they can get trapped in a conversation, like you're talking one-on-one with someone, and you're hanging out in the group, but you do need to speak with other people. You do need to go somewhere else, or whatever it might be. So having a few lines that you can use so that you can end the conversation positively and send someone on their way with another group, or just sort of, let them know that you'll meet them later. Perfectly good way of doing that. But don't feel like you have to stick with someone just because you engage with them. You might connect with them later, but there's lots of ways that you can join a group and leave a group effectively. These are just some of the suggestions that I have. Now, this last one, can we connect quickly on LinkedIn, is a great way of ending a conversation, right? Because it feels like an action item that's happening that is a natural parting point for the conversation. and you've updated your LinkedIn profile ahead of the event, so that's great. Here's a quick tip. If you have the LinkedIn app on your phone, what you're going to do is you're going to open the LinkedIn app on your phone. You click on the search bar, which I know is kind of weird, but that's where you click on first. Click on the search bar within the LinkedIn app, and then you'll see in this middle image the small QR code. You click on that, and that brings up your QR code, which is going to take you to your profile. And that the person with their phone can scan that QR code, and then they can see your profile and they can connect with you right there and then if they want to, and you can scan their one. A really quick and easy way of just getting people to your LinkedIn profile so that they can see that. Makes you look like you're really tech savvy with your LinkedIn stuff if you can bring up the QR code. It's very hard to find in the search bar QR code, and then you can bring up that code and just scan it with a photo or scan it with the LinkedIn app as well. But that's a great way of then ending the conversation because you're now connected on LinkedIn, or you can now, click on the connect on LinkedIn, and then you can part ways and follow up with that person afterwards. One other piece of advice for research symposiums and conferences, to make sure that you do try to ask questions, especially in sort of group settings, where there may be research talks and there's an opportunity to ask a question. Sometimes it's a really great way of introducing yourself to lots of different people. Right, so questions are great when you're in sort of these sort of sessions because it makes the speaker feel good that people have questions because it's reinforcing that people are listening and they've enjoyed it. It's probably a question that other people have, so that other people in the room who didn't want to ask a question are going to benefit from that. And it gives you the opportunity to sort of keep the conversation going with the person who's presented because now they sort of know you more because you were the person who asked that question. So here's my advice for asking questions, especially where that is allowed and it's encouraged in sort of a symposium and a research talk, is to first of all encourage yourself always to ask a question, right? So challenge yourself to say, what questions can I ask today? But when you do ask the question, don't just stand up and say, so my question is this, because then everyone's like, who is that person? Where are they from? What's going on here? Always take the opportunity to introduce yourself. So you're going to stand up. Hi, I'm Dr. Joseph Barber. I'm the Director of Graduate Clinicians at Penn Square Services. My question is, right? And so in that moment in time, that 5 seconds, you've now introduced yourself to everyone in the room who can hear you, right? And if you have the microphone, which you should, if there is a microphone, then that's the whole room now knows who you are. So the room knows who you are, the speaker knows who you are, you ask a question, and then after the event, now you have more opportunity to connect with the speaker, right? Because you've begun a professional interaction with them. They presented, you asked a question, you nodded your head when they gave you an answer, and then you follow up with them and say, hey, I was the person who answered this question. I'm Joseph. I really appreciated your answer. And then you have an opportunity to take that conversation to the next step, right? Maybe you follow up afterwards. Maybe you ask them another question, depending on, maybe it's at a networking event afterwards. But you're in a much better position now that you've asked that question to start that follow-up conversation than if you hadn't asked the question. So always challenge yourself to ask a question. Other ways you can support your peers. Asking questions, I think, is a great way to support your peers. As I said, it makes people feel like their talk was impactful and interesting. Poster sessions are always great to sort of support people, right? So they're at their poster. First of all, you can go meet them at their poster and connect with them. You might see these types of posts on LinkedIn, which I think are great posts. Obviously, you can't do this if you're the poster presenter by yourself. You don't want to be doing a selfie like this. So you might meet someone at a poster and say, hey, have you posted this on LinkedIn? And they're like, no, I'm busy. And then you might say, hey, I'm happy to take a picture on your phone, and then you can go and post it, right? So you might offer to do that for them so that they can then make these types of posts on LinkedIn so that other people who weren't at these poster sessions can then learn about their research. Right, so this is a great way of advocating for yourself, showcasing your great research, all these other things that are out there. So, helping people get these photos, taking photos, asking them if they want their photo taken on their phone. And then you can also take photos, right? So you can say, wow, this is a great poster. Do you mind if I, share this on my LinkedIn profile? So these are different now because this is a person who is taking a picture of someone presenting their poster and then sharing it on their profile, right? So it's not the poster presenter sharing it on the poster presenter's profile. It's someone viewing the poster and then that person sharing this on their LinkedIn profile. So shouting out, lifting up people who are doing the research so that other people can see that. So you can do that for your peers. You can do that for people in your lab, PhD students, undergrads, interns, whatever it might be. And here's one more example. The only advice I would have for this person sharing this poster is perhaps having less ceiling involved in the photo, but otherwise, so once you've done your cropping of the photo, this is a really great way, again, of lifting other people, empowering the work that they're doing, and really advocating for those in your community. Okay, right at the end of the workshop now, just a few things that we can be doing after the event, or you can be doing after the event to wrap up the whole process. One of the most important things to do is to reward yourself for having done it, right? So it may have taken a little bit of energy to get to an event like this. You may have been hesitant to go, but once you've done it, make sure that you spend some time and say, great job, right? Great job for putting yourself out there. Great job for introducing yourself. Great job for asking some questions, whatever it may be. I think it's critically important. And whether it's chocolate or ice cream, find a way to sort of say, well done. There's information that you gain from the event, right? Any conversation that you had, new people that you met, advice that you may have shared, that's all information that's going to float around in your head and then slowly evaporate unless you find an opportunity to sort of put it down in a database or on paper so that you can actually recall that. And so I'll give you an example of what that's going to look like or what that can look like in a second. If you say that you connect with people at the event, probably within 24 hours, you'd want to send a connection request on LinkedIn or a follow-up email just to make sure that the people don't forget you. But that's a great way of making sure that you are keeping the conversation going. And then any advice that you did get, just reflect on it. Make sure you say to yourself, well, what did I learn from that, right? What was beneficial about those interactions? What do I know better about myself now at these events? What did I do well at these events? What information can I leverage in my next steps, whether it's resumes, interviewing, or whatever it might be? A sort of a contact database or a sort of a career database is a really great tool to have. This is just an example of the types of columns that you might have in this database that sort of allow you to track information as you're connecting with people. This is especially good if you're applying for jobs, right? You can add jobs applied to when you applied, with the job description, things like that. But anytime that you're connecting with people, trying to take that information that you've gained from your head and get it into a database, an Excel spreadsheet, whatever it might look like, is a great way to feel like you've made a tangible progress, right? You can actually see the progress that you've made because all the different cells in your database get filled out. And it also helps you to identify what the next steps are. Any blank cells in your database are things that you might be able to do next, right? So again, just an example, but a great way to make the whole process feel much more structured. A follow-up email, just a sample email to someone that you met, just to sort of remind them who you were, what you talked about. And then in many cases, if you didn't connect in real time on LinkedIn, one of the great ways of keeping the conversation going is to say, hey, can I connect on LinkedIn? And even if they don't say yes, you can certainly reach out and do a connection request on LinkedIn. If they say no, and then obviously don't, but most people aren't going to say no. So if they say yes or if they don't respond, then the next step would be to send that LinkedIn invitation. Okay, a few resources to wrap up, and then you're all set for your event, your next event, and hopefully some of this information has been helpful for you. On the Penn Career Services YouTube channel, we have a networking playlist of videos, workshops that we've done. So you can take a closer look at this. The link's here. These are just sort of different workshops that we've done for graduate students and postdocs, many of which that you'll find hopefully helpful as part of your LinkedIn updating or your different networking strategies that you're working on. My office collaborates with the Penn alumni team at University of Pennsylvania, and we put on some webinars for Penn alumni. These webinars are freely available for everyone to access. So a few of these are focused on networking and different types of strategies for building collaborations and things like that. So these are also great webinars, videos that you can watch in your own time if you find those helpful. Informational interviews, I mentioned this right at the beginning. These are types of conversations that you have with someone who may be in a role that you're excited by, or in a field or an industry or an employer that you would be interested in working at, and you're connecting with them to sort of learn a little bit more about their experience and how they got there and their own career pathways. So if you're interested in doing more of these informational interviews, this guide is a great way of gaining some best practices associated with that. Again, freely accessible on the Penn Career Services website. And then I did a sort of a look for some general networking tips and tricks articles out there. Some of these are very science specific, some of these are academic conference specific. So these are all links that you can take a look at in your own time, just to look at the sort of the diversity of career advice and networking advice that's out there. Each will add to your sort of understanding of how you can position yourself effectively. But I put these out here just so that you can continue the process of learning strategies for being the best version of yourself in these types of networking events. This QR code will take you to the slides for this presentation. So if you're interested in any of the AI prompts or any of the other resources that I shared, you can just go ahead and use this QR code. That will take you there. Follow the link that I have here. That's going to be in the description of this video as well. So you can a direct link to the slides. As I said, hopefully this is helpful for you. We've covered a lot of ground, a lot of information. Good luck with your next event. make the most of that to build community, make the most of it to gain information that you can leverage for your career next steps, make the most of it to lift up and empower those people around you, and reward them for their hard work, positively reinforce yourself and them for all the effort that you're putting in, and take advantage of all these community building experiences. Thanks, everyone.